Hi, and welcome to this Lernard.com section on build agents in the Jenkins chapter. So far, in this section, we've been using Jenkins to orchestrate the provisioning of a server, its configuration as a web server, and the deployment of a working web app to that server by cloning code from Git and performing build operations automatically. So far, for all these things, we've been performing the operations locally on the Jenkins server itself, and for our own case of a single job in a development environment, that's been fine. But in industry, there's likely to be many more jobs being run a lot more frequently. Build automation can be very intensive on CPU and memory, so multiple concurrent jobs can quickly overload a server. Jenkins can be configured to run only a certain amount of jobs at a time, of course, but in cases of high usage, this can cause large queues of waiting builds, and so waste the time of the development team, and ultimately waste the money of the company. To solve this problem, Jenkins allows a master-agent relationship, whereby a central build and orchestration server can be used to control individual nodes onto which a remote build agent is installed. In this diagram here, I've arbitrarily chosen 3 agents, but in fact in large deployments there might well be hundreds of agents, all concurrently servicing build jobs while the master is used as the place to view the results of those jobs, change global settings and control the whole show. Build agents clone the code onto which they're performing their tasks direct from GitHub, so no traffic has to flow through the central server. It doesn't act as a middleman in any way, it just passes out instructions to the agents, which in return report back to it with the status of their respective builds. Once the various aspects of a build are complete, the deployment occurs directly from the agents to the web server or server farm, so the agents themselves are the ones that require access to these web servers, along with all the programs required in advance to successfully perform a build. I should say at this point that the term agent technically refers to the small service or daemon running on the server that Jenkins communicates with, and the server itself that runs that agent is called a node. Sometimes people will use the term build agent or slave to mean the same thing as node, and build agent is often used as a generic term in industry in any case for what Jenkins specifically calls a node. Okay. So, subcontracting automation jobs from the master to build agents is conceptually not too complex. So without further ado, let's jump over to our Ubuntu VirtualBox VM and get started. The first thing we need to do is get hold of a virtual machine to act as the build agent we're going to use for our experimentation. If I browse to Amazon here, choose EC2 and select Running Instances, you can see that I've cheated, and I've already got a pre-made blank Ubuntu server here that I've labelled Jenkins_node. At this late stage in the course, I feel like you're all fairly comfortable spinning up a virtual machine, whether that's by using VirtualBox or Terraform or manually in AWS. There's instructions on all 3 of these methods on this site, so I won't bog down this particular section by repeating them. But the first thing you're going to want to do is use your favourite method to spin yourself up an Ubuntu virtual machine accessible via SSH. You don't need any other ports open but the standard SSH port of 22. Once you've got your machine spun up, make a note of the IP address required to connect into it. In my case, I'm just going to copy and paste this one here. Now we've got that IP, let's open up a terminal and use SSH to connect into our server so we can get started configuring it as a build agent. I'll just accept the known host confirmation here. Great, so we're on the server now. And of course at the moment it's just a vanilla Ubuntu box. There's nothing on it. Luckily for us, there isn't really much we need to do to get this node configured with a build agent, as Jenkins is going to do most of the heavy lifting for us automatically. The one thing we do need to do is install Java, as the agent runs as a Java virtual machine. So I'm going to write sudo apt update to update the list of available packages to us, then && sudo apt install openjdk -8-jdk to install Java. This isn't the only way to install Java by any means, or the only version that will work. There's quite a few packages and versions that will get us what we need, but in industry we'd be using Ansible anyway to create our build agents. We wouldn't make them manually like this, so it doesn't matter which command we pick here, just use whichever method you're most comfortable with. For anyone that's done the Ansible section and fancies a bit of practice, maybe try getting Java onto this box using Ansible instead of manually. For the rest of us though, now that's finished installing, we can check it was successful by typing java-version, and here we can see it's showing us our OpenJDK version, so all is well. Okay, let's drop out of this server for a moment, back into our local Ubuntu machine. The next thing we need to do is give Jenkins access to this server. Of course, Jenkins already technically has access to this server with the Ubuntu user we just logged in with, but specifically I want to give it access on its own user to a specific home directory which it's going to use for our builds. First thing, let's get hold of the id_rsa.pub we have for the standard id_rsa key we've been using for our Jenkins SCP transfers by writing sudo cat, then the path to the key, which, if you remember, is /var/lib/jenkins/.ssh, because Jenkins considers this path to be its home directory, and then id_rsa.pub. Now we're going to copy this key and then once more SSH back into our Jenkins build agent server that we've created, so that we can now add this key to allow Jenkins server to connect in. This is one of the few occasions I'm going to actually create a new user rather than just recycling the Ubuntu one, as Jenkins agents are really going to run under the Jenkins user every single time you encounter them, so I think this is one instance where it's worth me not being lazy. So, to create our user we use sudo useradd -m -d for the home directory /var/lib/jenkins, then Jenkins for the username. That path we've specified there is telling Ubuntu that for the Jenkins user the home directory is going to be /var/lib/jenkins, and it will go and create that path when it creates the user. So this is just the same as how the Jenkins master server behaves, with the same home directory, so it's nice and easy to remember what we're doing. This is just a convention though, and not compulsory, so if you want to use the path lobster barbados instead of varlib jenkins, or anything else that comes to mind, the agent would still work just fine. Now that that user exists, let's cd into the home directory and create a new directory called .ssh. Inside this directory, we're going to make a file called authorized keys as usual, and then add our public key that we copied so that we can connect in with Jenkins to manage the agent. So, sudo vim.ssh/authorized keys, then paste in the public key we saved to our clipboard, and now save. As we've been using sudo to make these, they'll currently be owned by root, so we also want to do sudo chown -r jenkins.ssh, so that the folder and everything in it is owned by the Jenkins user and it can read it. Great, we're done with this machine for the moment, so let's exit out of here. Now we've configured that public key on the node, we're going to need to configure our private key for Jenkins. But wait, I hear you cry, haven't we already done that during the section where we allowed Ansible to target the web server? And yes, excellent point. But in the interests of simplicity, we used a bit of a shortcut to do that by just copying the file over into a .ssh folder. You may remember me mentioning at the time that there were other, possibly better ways to do it. Well, in this last section, we're going to upgrade to one of the more professional ways of doing things, as we're all experts now. So first, let's get the private key using sudo cat /var/lib/jenkins/.ssh/id_rsa. And you can see here I've fuzzed my key out here for security, even though in reality I delete them all after I've made the course, because I want to send the message that generally you should always try and keep yours secure too. As you can guess through the fuzz, I'm just copying the key here. And now we want to put this key into the Jenkins server as some new credentials. So, open up a new tab in Firefox. Browse to localhost :8080 where the Jenkins server is running, and then click on the link marked Credentials. We're going to use the Jenkins store here, and we'll store the key under the global credentials again. Click Add Credentials in the left-hand menu, then, from the drop-down, we want to choose Username with Private Key. We could leave the ID blank for it to generate one, but in this case I plan to use it for something later on, so I'm going to specify the slightly more memorable agent key. Let's give it a quick description. And as we've created the Jenkins user on the build agent node, we want a username of Jenkins. We've only got the one option here, to enter the key directly, and if we select that we can paste in the key that we copied. All private keys should start with begin RSA private key and end end RSA private key, so you can tell if you've cut and pasted it right. Right, let's save that and then come out of the credentials setting and back to the main dashboard. Now we've configured our credentials, we need to tell Jenkins about the build agent, which we can do by clicking Manage Jenkins here, scrolling down a bit in this list, then choosing Manage Nodes. We can see here there's already our master node in this list, as we can already do builds on our master server, of course. Let's select New Node here and give our node a name, which I'll just call Lernard Agent, but pick whatever you fancy. I once worked at a business that used the names of the planets in the solar system for its servers, which was fine until they outgrew the rather limited selection of names available and then bizarrely switched to Tottenham Hotspur football players. Anyway, we only have the one option here, which is Permanent Agent, which is all good as that's what we want to make, but I will come back later in this section and have a chat about the other types of agent that are available. Okay, so here we need to enter some details for our agent. I'll just give it a quick description here. The number of executors is the amount of concurrent jobs the agent is capable of running, so leaving this at 1 for now is fine. The remote root folder is the place Jenkins will perform builds and generally transact its business, and in our case we want that to be /var/lib/Jenkins, the home directory we made for the Jenkins user. This next field, Labels, is a really useful way to group agents into particular categories. As we only have one agent, that's not so important. But imagine if I had hundreds of agents and I wanted maybe half of them to be for npm build projects and the other half to be for Java Maven projects. I could give all the nodes in each group the label either npm or Java, and then the builds that required a particular type of server could search by label and always target the correct type. So label is an abstract identification string that can most easily be thought of as just being group. As we have access via SSH to the server, we can choose Launch Agents via SSH, which has the advantage that Jenkins will automatically transfer over the buildagent.jar file of the appropriate version and run it without us having to do any downloading and installing on the agent side. I'll just quickly go and copy the IP address of the agent from the AWS console tab here, as I've forgotten it. There we go. And now for our credentials, let's choose the newly created Jenkins SSH private key. Finally, for the host verification key strategy, at this point we're happy to just use non-verifying, as we're not working in a highly secure environment just now, and it's nice and quick. So, to recap, we've created a virtual machine instance somewhere, installed Java onto it, added an SSH key to allow Jenkins to talk to it, and then given Jenkins the details of where it is. Alright, let's give this a test launch and see what happens. Great! You can see here that Jenkins has successfully connected to the agent and it's online. This means it's ready to be used to receive a build. Let's browse out of this and back to the dashboard for later. And now, let's hop over to Visual Studio Code and once more open up our Jenkins repository ready to make some more additions. As you might hope, the agent that Jenkins chooses to build on is defined in the pipeline as code, so it will get version controlled along with the details of the build. Where we've specified an agent here as any, which will just build wherever is free, we're going to change this to say open curly brackets, label, open quotes, and then in my case Lernard agent, and in your case whatever you called your build agent on the label. If we were to now go and check this into Git and then run it, it would definitely fail. But I actually think we should do that anyway, as it's going to help me illustrate the next part of this section. Plus, up until now, I've been editing out every single failure, and I think it will be nice to have at least one example of a failed build demoed in this chapter. So, as always, we switch to the terminal, and git status, git add a, git commit -m, and a short poem about how bored you are of hearing me say these things, and then git push origin master. Now that's done, let's hop over to Firefox and run our build. In this section we are changing literally nothing about the build at all at this point. The stages are all going to remain identical, so for once I think there's just no reason to go and create another section here. We can just reuse section 6. So, into the master branch, build with parameters, and in the interests of speed I'll leave both of these ones on no, as we know this is going to fail in any case. And there we go, sweet failure. If we go and have a look in here at the reason it failed, we're seeing npm not found, which illustrates the next key point I want to make about build agents. So far, we've discussed agents being used to increase the power of Jenkins by allowing it to handle more builds concurrently. But the other reason to use agents is that they can have different things installed on them to the master server that are required for particular parts of the build. So for example, in our case, the build requires npm, which we can and have run just as easily on the master. But imagine if you had many hundreds of agents required to do tens of subtly different tasks such as running Selenium, testing, building with different build frameworks, or maybe even doing things with Windows. Would you really want to attempt to do all of this on a single type of build agent? Probably not. The install would be pretty difficult to get right as well. In reality, build agents tend to be installed with the minimum things required to do the tasks you actually want them to do, and then split out by type into specific purposes. So, for example, one obvious way we might split our own agents if we had multiple agents would be into groups that did either Terraform or Ansible or npm, with each group only having the configuration on it that enables it to do its own specific type of task. With that concept in mind then, let's hop back into our build agent and configure it for npm now we know that's what's required. So, grabbed straight from Google, here's the command for adding the node apt repo details. curl -sl https://deb.nodesource.com/setup_10.x downwards pipe sudo bash dash. Of course, you don't need to remember that command. Just Google install npm and it will be there in most of the top 10 pages. Right, now that's finished configuring on our box, we install node itself and thereby npm by typing sudo apt install node.js. Just a reminder to anyone wondering, npm is Node Package Manager, which is why we're installing node.js here. Great, done. And we can test that's working now by running npm-v, and there we can confirm our relatively recent npm version is working. If we wanted to do the whole build on this agent, we'd also need to install Terraform and Ansible, of course. But rather than doing that, I'm going to exit out of here so we can use this as an excuse to demonstrate one of the more powerful features of build agents. If we hop into Visual Studio Code again here, we're currently defining a single build agent for this project, on which all of the stages will be built. But in fact, if we want to, we can use a different type of build agent for any level of granularity we like. We're not obliged to use the same build agent for every part of the build. Let's demo this now by cut and pasting this agent declaration and adding a copy under the Terraform stage. We don't have Terraform on our Lernard agent, of course, so I'm going to specify that it do this build on the master server by using the label master. We also don't have Ansible on the agent, so let's copy this over to the Ansible stage as well. So here now, what we've got is a build that will use our remote agent only for the npm build stage, and will build on master for the Ansible and Terraform stages. Though if we'd wanted to, we could have gone and made a special node for each type of build. I just didn't do that to save time. The final thing this agent is going to need is a quick tweak to the deploy stage. Previously, we were deploying from master, but now as we're deploying from the agent, which doesn't currently have access to an SSH key, we're going to need to give it one. We could have just gone and installed the key on the box itself, but in industry it's not normal practice to have hard-coded secret keys on all your build agents, so we're going to use a plugin called SSH Agent to achieve a more secure way to handle things. Down here in the deploy stage then, we're going to write SSH Agent, and then open a pair of curly brackets, and write the word credentials followed by a colon. This is going to allow us to use credentials that are stored in Jenkins direct in our SCP statement below. It will just inject them in there, so we need to specify the credential ID of the SSH key we made, which you may remember I called agent key so it would be memorable. So, I open a pair of square brackets, then write agent key in quotes, then open a pair of curly brackets, and finally copy our whole shell executable command here into those brackets. This SSH agent functionality doesn't come out of the box in Jenkins. We need to add it as another plugin. That's the case with an awful lot of useful things in Jenkins. In real deployments, there are likely to be a big stack of plugins that you install as part of the server build, but luckily Jenkins has made it super easy for us to do this. So let's hop over to the Jenkins server here in Firefox, head to the main dashboard and click Manage Jenkins. Choose Manage Plugins from the list, and then by selecting Available, we can see a library of possible plugins we can install on our Jenkins master server. As we want to install SSH Agent, let's write SSH up here in the search box. And there we can see SSH Agent plugin. The list of available plugins is large, but up until now in this course I've not been making heavy use of them, partly as we haven't needed them to do what we wanted to achieve particularly, but also because I think that using commands is a good way to illustrate that Jenkins is really just a general orchestrator for whatever it is you happen to want to do, rather than a specific build one or a user of plugins. That being said though, plugins often provide a neater and more elegant solution than shell executables full of bash, so it's always worth checking out if there's a decent quality one available for whatever it is you want to achieve. In any case, let's select this and click Install without restart here, as this one doesn't require a restart. And now here on this next screen we can see the install get underway. Great, 2 blue successes for us, so let's head back to the dashboard and have a go at running our build. Whoops, I've just remembered we haven't pushed our code yet. Let me hop back into the terminal and a quick fast-forwarded git will do that now. There we go, now we're ready to go. So, section 6, master branch, build with parameters, and as we've just configured this to hopefully allow us to build the entire pipeline, I'm now going to choose yes to both of these. I think a bit of fast forward here won't go amiss. And there we go. It's run through our pipeline once more, and it's done all the appropriate steps. But now it's utilised our remote build agent for build side, and our master build agent for the provision and configuration side. If we nick this IP from the logs here quickly, we can once again browse to our server and see for ourselves that our web app has been correctly deployed. Apologies for the section 5 message, I think that's just left over from the last time we ever updated it. Still, I don't think we need to dwell much more on the basic concept here. As though build agents are an integral part of Jenkins, I don't think it's hard to understand or that fascinating to see this building in separate locations. One thing I would like to mention though, is that although we've covered the basic concept of Jenkins agents here, there are a few other ways to implement this than permanent agents, as I mentioned before. There's also agents that initiate the call to Jenkins themselves. There's swarm agents that spin up only when needed in the cloud, or on Docker, and then spin down again when they're done being used. And there's also N+1 clouds of agents, where the cloud exists at all times, but when it starts to get too full, then at that point another agent spins up. There's all kinds of custom strategies people use too, and I've even heard tell of people using serverless to do various parts of the build on. None of these strategies is fundamentally that different from what we've done here though, and personally I think the best way to learn the strengths and weaknesses of a different type of build agent is to learn them as you actually use them. After I've made the next chapter on Docker, I might add a special section to the end there on Dockerized swarm agents though, as they're my favourite. Anyway, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel rushing towards us now, and we're almost done with this chapter. Now we've broached the whole subject of plugins though, there's one more little unrelated gem that I'd like to show you, known as Blue Ocean. As I've mentioned a few times over this course, knowing Jenkins and understanding its purpose should allow you to switch to any other CI system with relatively little work. But Jenkins itself can sometimes look a bit old-fashioned around the edges compared to some of these upstart young pretenders to the world of build. Luckily for us, there's a plugin known as Blue Ocean, which turns the Jenkins interface into a thing of unsurpassed beauty. The functionality will remain the same, but the feng shui is tuned to promote calm and inner peace in the user with clear diagrams and logs that make understanding what's going on that much easier at a single glance. Installing Blue Ocean is as simple as installing SSH Agent was, as it's a plugin. So, if we browse back to the Jenkins main menu here, and then into Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins, and once more select the Available tab, This time up in the search box, let's search for Blue Ocean. And sure enough, here we are. So, check the box and click Install. As you can see, there's a whole lot more dependencies on this beauty than there was for SSH Agent. Let's actually tick this Restart Jenkins box, come to think of it, as though I initially asked for no restart, I think it's actually recommended for Blue Ocean. And now, a bit of the old fast forward here should serve us nicely. I'm going to click refresh here, as hopefully Jenkins will have restarted itself by now after my fast forward. It doesn't always tell you properly on this screen. And yes, there we go, now we can log in again. Straight away on the main screen now, we can see this Open Blue Ocean button here. Blue Ocean is just another GUI for Jenkins, one that's perfectly tuned to using pipeline as code projects, such as multi-branch pipelines that we're making. You can switch between Classic and Blue Ocean View as much as you want, and the menus for the global settings are only available in Classic, so Blue Ocean is primarily useful for troubleshooting and checking builds. So here we are. I'll choose section 6 here and select our most recent build. So now we get this nice clean interface, and you can see our build and test parallel stage there much better stacked on top of each other like that. If I click around here a bit, you can see how much easier it is to see which logs apply to which stage and to drill down through them a bit. To run a build, all I need to do is switch back to the job window here, click branches, and there's a little play button like this at the right hand side of each branch to kick off a job. You'll actually hardly ever use this, as in industry jobs tend to kick themselves off automatically, but it's handy to know that it's there. Let's finish this chapter by kicking off our pipeline in Blue Ocean, so then we can see the glory of all our labours. Beautiful. So, as this runs through then, let me just congratulate you for reaching the end of this chapter, and congratulate those of you who've done the entire course 1,000-fold. Please do email me and let me know what you thought of the lessons. If there's anything you'd like me to cover, or mistakes that you think I've made, let me know about those too. I'm intending to make more of these chapters, so if there's DevOps tools you want to hear about, get in touch about that, and feel free to ask any questions you may have about anything you've learned. I'm just a one-man band, so I may not be able to get back to everything, but depending on how many I get, I'll try my best to answer all of them if I can. As with all the other chapters in this course, the last section is going to be a quick recap of everything that we've looked at in this chapter, and is designed to be glanced at the day before that job interview. If you've just sat through this chapter, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go and look at it now, but if you do fancy a recap, then I'll see you there.